Awesome. So, hello everyone. Thanks for being patient and waiting.
Oops, you're muted. Here you go.
Sorry. Okay. Awesome. So now we get started. Thank you everyone for being here. It's really exciting. Thanks for being patient as we wait for more people to find their way in here. I wanted to introduce the WRC, which is hosting this event along with Denise, but the Women's Resource Center, as some of you may already know or have been involved in, is a space at SDSU that strives to provide a vibrant, brave, and inclusive space that specifically educates, empowers, and advocates for women's rights and gender oppressed folks. And we provide support to students facing gender-based oppression by creating an environment that fosters healing, intersectional feminist activism, and enhancement to students' academic, personal, and professional success. Through an intersectional feminist lens, the WRC offers leadership opportunities, the BRAVE Project, which is a training on sexual violence that all students at SDSU and staff and faculty can take, as well as educational and healing events like series like these that address gender justice. And the Women in Gender Equity program is also another thing that we do. It serves incoming first-year students interested in feminism. So that's a brief overview of us. And we also wanted to make everyone aware that we will be recording during this event. We will be recording in speaker view, so we will mostly be seeing Denise's face and her presentation, but if that is uncomfortable, then feel free to turn your camera off, turn your audio off. And we also want to say that we're not going to record any discussion-based portions or anything in which we're disclosing to each other, and that is completely confidential and will stay in here. So just want to give everybody a heads up about that, and I'll let Denise introduce herself.
Awesome. Thank you, Celine. Yeah, so my name is Denise. I am an alumni of SDSU. I graduated in 2016, and I think that was like the year after, or maybe the year that the WRC started. And so I feel like I missed out sometimes, which is why I'm so passionate about serving the WRC community. And I have like a little slide for my introductions, and I think I'll go ahead and start the screen share, sorry. Okay, so I wanted to also mention that this work of decolonial healing is something that to me feels very personal, as a person of color, as an immigrant, as someone who migrated from Malaysia to the US as an international student. I have recently become, not really recently, but I have always been aware, but more recently have been really immersed in understanding how the praxis of decolonial healing looks like for me. So I think it's really easy for us to intellectualize colonization, systemic oppression, but how do we actually begin to look at the ways that our bodies, our individual bodies as humans, right, are affected by these cultural and systemic ways of oppression? And that's the question that I think will be centered in over the 8 weeks. And today will be a little bit more like a primer, an introduction to what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be doing it, alongside, I think, the context in which we understand decolonial healing and trauma healing. They are interrelated, and if anything, I think that many forms, if not all forms of trauma, can be rooted back to colonization. So this topic to me just feels really important. It's tender as well. I really want to invite you into a space where you meet yourself where you are. I totally understand that, with everything that's been happening, the pandemic itself has been really devastating for many folks. And then I know that you're all, starting classes online. So this isn't really, my intention is not to throw more information at you. Rather, it's a space for you to begin to share, to take up space, right, with your body as folks who, myself included, who have been historically marginalized and oppressed. How do we then take up space with our lived experience as a practice of decolonizing ourselves? So that's just sort of the little primer. Okay, I'm having trouble with like seeing all of you. I don't know how to do that while also sharing my screen. So if anything, oh, here it is. Wow, okay, cool. I see all of you now.
Denise, are you also on speaker view? Because I don't think I can change it to that at the moment. I have you as like a thumbnail.
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe that it will be what will be on the recording will be the screen that I'm sharing, and then me on like the little recording.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sorry.
Awesome. No worries. No apologies needed. Okay, so we're gonna start with a grounding meditation, and then I'll introduce myself a little bit more, talk a little bit more in detail my positionalities, what I do and how I do it, and some acknowledgements, followed by group agreements that can help us create a safer space. And then I'll also check in with you all on how you want to feel met and safe in this space, safer, right? There's honestly, as a trauma-informed practitioner and trauma resolution guide, there really is no such thing as a fully safe space, but what we can do is create conditions in which it's safe enough so that when trauma does show up, we know how to meet it. You know what your options are. So that's part of what the group agreements exist for. And then we'll do a lesson followed by the group shares. And just as a reminder, the group shares will not be recorded. We'll pause the recording and only start it up when I'm teaching or offering a practice. And today, not included here, but we'll weave in 2 practices that you can take home. So let's go ahead and start with the grounding practice. So find yourself in a comfortable seat. You are welcome to lay down as well. However, I find that sometimes seated upright can be really, really supportive. And we'll just begin by orienting. And orienting is practice of using our senses to name, sense, feel, taste, so on and so forth, our environment, our present moment surroundings. And what that does is it helps signal to our nervous system. It's called neuroception. It signals to our nervous system that we're here, that we're safe, that we can attune to and choice over what's around us. So we'll just start by inviting a soft gaze and looking around your space. You're likely very familiar with where you are, maybe you're at home. But this time, looking around with just the intention of picking up textures and colors. So for example, what I'm really drawn to right now is a crystal that I have on my altar towards my left. And I'm just noticing its kind of like rough edges and its shine. Its color is orange. So I'm naming the object, I'm naming its color, naming its texture. You're welcome to continue looking around the space, not needing to necessarily like hard focus on something, but rather allowing for a softer gaze. You can do that with multiple objects and multiple textures, or just pick one. It's totally up to you. All possibilities are welcomed. And as you look around, maybe you also begin to feel what is touching you or what you are touching. So for example, the parts of your body that are being supported by what's beneath you. Maybe noticing any temperature or textures that are there. And if any of these invitations don't feel accessible or don't feel like they're available to you right now, that's okay. Just know that you can just listen along, engage in whatever capacity feels right for you. Let's take a deep breath in here. And exhale. We'll do 2 more like that. Inhale. And exhale. 1 more inhale, maybe drawing that breath all the way down towards the womb space. Maybe sighing it out. Noticing anything that you smell, if anything. From here, maybe licking your teeth and your lips to see if there's anything that you might taste. It can be pleasant or unpleasant. Maybe something you had for breakfast or lunch. And just noticing what's there to notice, not needing to make anything of it, not needing to assign binaries or, for example, good or bad. And then last but not least, is noticing what you hear. Maybe that's the sound of my voice, perhaps sounds in your environment, anything that is there to pick up in terms of the sense of sound or hearing, rather. And it's okay if this practice didn't do anything for you, or maybe it helped you feel a little bit more present. Just know that this is an option. This is something that can be available to you. I often find that this practice helps me most when I feel a little bit overwhelmed, when I feel like I don't have control. Orienting and using my senses allows me to come into a little bit more presence, a little bit more here and now. From here, we'll just begin to, you're invited to imagine that your energetic roots begin to grow. And so these energetic roots are yours. They look however they look to you. And the idea is that these roots help us feel connected to our earth and our earth body, right? The elements that are within our body, it can be mirrored in our relationship to the earth. So by growing your energetic roots, just take a moment if you want to notice how deep your roots want to grow. Maybe it's texture, it's colors. And you're welcome to keep your eyes open for this, close them. Just really noticing what it's like to go down, down, down. Maybe dropping your sense of awareness down deep to the soil of the earth. Allowing your roots to take up space with depth. And maybe allowing for these roots to be nourished by the regenerative aliveness of the earth, her compostable nature, her cyclical nature, and maybe noticing any qualities of this cool, damp earth, perhaps gaseous layers or watery layers, maybe even all the way down to a fiery core, through and past the mycelium network. Just imagine that, if you want, that this earth is your playground and your roots get to really enjoy what the earth has to offer. And that by allowing ourselves to connect, to come into right relationship with the earth, to honor her cycles through honoring our own cycles, honoring her seasonal changes by honoring our seasonal changes, we come into right relationship with her. And there's a regenerative nature that what we compost, what we allow to die and be buried becomes food, right? It gives life to other forms of life, which in return gives life to us. So it's a cyclical nature rather than an exploitative one. Beautiful. From here, we'll allow our roots now to grow wide. So earlier on, our roots grew deep and down, right? Our individual sovereign taking up of space deep and down, and now we allow them to grow wide, perhaps meeting with the root systems of other trees, maybe the root systems of those that are here with us and those watching the recording, and imagining that our roots create space for one another, that it becomes this beautiful interwoven web of root systems that support each other, that are stronger together, that acknowledge each tree root system or each root system as sovereign, as wise, that carries its own vibrational quality of love, that it gets to take up space, that each has its own story, its own texture, its own color, that we honor and embrace the differences that make us unique, right, as humans, and the very real lived experiences, the stories and narratives, and the wisdom that we carry. So just maybe take a moment to visualize this collective root system that grows stronger every time we allow ourselves to take up space with our fullness and create the space for our community to do the same. Wonderful. From here, gently draw your awareness back up through your own root system, up through the level of the body, perhaps resting at the belly or the heart space, wherever feels right for you. Maybe place a hand somewhere in the body, just acknowledging this beautiful vessel, this beautiful brown body, black body, body of color. And perhaps inviting a softness that can help meet perhaps the edges, the ways that we've been required to show up, obligated to show up, and allowing this softness to say, hey, yes, we do this. Yes, we show up in this way. And there are parts of myself that get to be met, that get to be a little bit more tender, that get to be alive. You'll take 2 to 3 breaths here on your own. Gently blinking open your eyes if they're not already there. And before looking at the screen, just looking around for space once more, orienting to here and now. It's 2:22 p.m. Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. I hope that that was helpful. If you can access the chat, I want to see if I can get the chat open for me too. Maybe sharing how that was for you, perhaps on a scale of 1 to 10, how present do you feel right now? While you're doing that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about who I am. Awesome. Relaxing, feel a lot more slowed down. Great. Relax and calm. Thank you. So, yeah, beautiful. Wonderful. Great. I'm so glad that that was calming for you all. Amazing. Okay. So, who am I? I am a queer Malaysian Chinese cisgendered woman. So I grew up, born and raised in Malaysia, and I moved to the United States as an immigrant, as an international student with an F1 visa in 2013. So I'm just around 7 years of being here in the US. I'm mostly able-bodied. I have access to education and healthcare, and I am an immigrant pending my green card paperwork. I am married to a cis white man, and I acknowledge the privileges that come as being someone who identifies with the gender that I was assigned at birth, being someone who's married to a white man, and have the privilege to not only apply, but to pay for and afford my legal immigration status here in the United States. I'm an alumni. I graduated in 2016. I identify as well as a psychic empath, and I am a Reiki master, and I also read the Akashic Records. But what I do now mostly is decolonial healing, so both as an educator and as someone who is really interested in the practice of decolonial healing, which is my intention as an offering to you all today. Community building is something that I'm really passionate about as well. And I also do somatic trauma resolution, and that is mostly through one-on-one healing. And in group settings, I offer tools that can allow you to begin the process of body-based healing. And I'll be offering one or two of them today in our session. I'm also a writer, a podcast host, a mama to a pit bull, blue-nosed pit bull. I recently started to fall in love with roller skating. I love the ocean, and I also really love trees. I name all the trees that are around me. I'm really passionate about creating spaces for women of color to heal. I primarily serve women of color right now. And creating the space for us to have these hard conversations, right? I wanted to acknowledge each one of you for being here, because it is not easy to show up amidst everything that's happening in your life, right? To create the space, because your energy is sacred, and you choosing to be here to have these hard conversations around decolonizing and healing trauma is brave. And I do not take that lightly. It's a deep honor for me to receive and be in space with your energy. So really want you to know that I appreciate that. And I'm also really interested in how we can create new culture, and we'll talk a lot about that today, that's based in sovereignty, interdependence, integrity, and co-creation. So I wanted to also take a moment to acknowledge the keepers of the land. I am on Kumeyaay territory. I recognize that we are on stolen land that was taken through genocide and murder and rape. I just wanted to name those things because it's real, and I trust that you can take care of yourself hearing these things. Also want to take a moment to acknowledge my teachers, Rachel Maddox, Resma Minakin, Adrienne Marie Brown. I also did the Brave project in, I think it was 2017 or 18? 17, yeah, it was end of 2017. So the teachers that put together the Brave project, and many, many more that have educated and taught me the work of decolonizing and trauma healing. I want to acknowledge my ancestors, those that have both been complicit and victims of colonization, and how I carry both of those in my own body. And I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement, and to say the names of Elijah McClain, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, whose justice and Elijah McClain's justice has not been served, Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times and is now paralyzed from the waist down. We demand justice for these folks and for all Black lives. We uplift and uphold the joy and liberation for Black lives. And also wanted to acknowledge the devastating effects of COVID and how we are all deeply impacted by this pandemic, the lives that have been lost, and just, you know, like the fact that we're meeting online and not in person, right? If that weren't a pandemic, we would be doing this in person. So all of this said, you know, I am acknowledging these with the intention of saying that we are going through this right now, and there's so much resilience that's coming through. We are experiencing these really painful things, but we're still here, right? We're here, and we'll make it through. Our ancestors have made it through, and so will we, and this is why we do it together. So I'd love to hear from you all. I'm gonna pause the recording. I'd love to hear your name and pronouns. My pronouns are she, her. I have them in my name. You're welcome to put them in your name as well. Oopsies, that's not what I wanted to copy and paste. Let's see if that works. Nope. So name and pronouns, location. You can share your lineage if you want. I shared that mine is Chinese, but I was born and raised in Malaysia, so I'm fourth generation Malaysian Chinese, which means that I am both Chinese by culture and Malaysian. Malaysian is a country that's really unique. It's diverse. It has multiple racial populations, and it all kind of blends together to create the Malaysian culture. So you're welcome to share that if you want. And I'm really curious how you're feeling. How are you really? How's like the start of the semester going for you? What's in your body? What's in your heart? And also curious why you're here. So I'm gonna type these into the chat real quick. So I'm gonna resume the recording and go back to screen shares. Make sure that it's on speaker view. Okay, there we go. All right, so what to expect over the next 8 weeks? Really my intention is for your lived experiences to be centered. To me, that's more important than, again, like throwing a bunch of information at you. Really, this information gets to be embodied, and it becomes a way in which we get to see how colonization impacts our lived experiences. And so this is where you get to share your stories. Today we won't have as much because really it's the context, it's the priming. But over the next 8 weeks, we will be doing more of that. I'll also be weaving in lessons and embodiment practices that are related to a decolonial healing praxis. And it will be a really gentle, slow, titrated approach to healing trauma, because the last thing we want is for you to feel overwhelmed by the amount of information that might be shared, or feeling like now that you're face to face with what's happening, that you have to heal it all right now. That is not how trauma is healed. To be honest, when we do that, it's often re-traumatizing and in some ways making the trauma worse. Oftentimes there can be this notion of like catharsis, right? We look for, like, we press into the places that hurt sometimes, especially what I've noticed in many healing spaces here in San Diego, that it can be really oriented towards like just big emotional processes, and it tends to overwhelm our nervous system. So instead, what we're doing is taking a slow and titrated process. So the titration is like, we'll do little by little, right? And we'll work with what's here. And then over time, we grow our capacity to hold more. But we start with what's small and doable, and that will create sustainability in our healing. And then, you know, also we won't be completely wiped out, right? Because we still have to live our life. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through these group agreements as quickly as possible. I'm aware of time, and I wanna make sure that we hear from you all at least one more time. And again, these are ways to create the conditions in which we feel safer to be who we are and how we are, and that if trauma shows up, you know how to meet it. So the first is self-consent and sovereignty. You do not need permission from me. You give yourself permission to meet yourself where you are. So everything is an invitation. You can opt out of any shares as you want. You can turn off your video at any time. If you come on a session and then you decide that actually this is not what I need today, you are welcome to change your mind and leave. I will not be offended. I trust that you are meeting yourself where you are. When we're sharing, you're welcome to take up space. You can take your time as much as you want, and there's no need to feel rushed. I think oftentimes there can be a sense of urgency, especially with, thinking of colonial capitalism. There's always this rush, right? And especially as bodies of color, I think we often feel like we can't take up space, right? That we have to hide, we have to make ourselves small, so that whiteness can be in the room, so that whiteness can have dominance. So this is where you get to take up space. And I understand that there are edges there, so the invitation is for you to choose for yourself, right? You are a sovereign being, whether or not you want to lean into that edge of taking up space. You can check in with yourself if you're sharing, and at the end, if you feel complete, you can say, I'm complete, and that's when we know that you're ready for us to move on to the other person. Because sometimes when we're taking our time, we might be silent, but that doesn't mean that we're done sharing. This is a judgment-free and brave space, so we're here to really listen to one another, to receive each other's lived experiences, and not to respond, right? We're not here to give advice. We're really here just to uplift and amplify the wisdom that is already within you. Confidentiality and anonymity, we acknowledge that everything is shared here will stay here. That's why we're not recording during the shares. And anything that we learn here, if we want to share, we uphold anonymity. So we won't say anything that identifies anyone in the group. We're in this together, right? And all parts of you are welcomed here. So no matter what level you are in your healing journey or how much you understand about colonization, maybe this is very new for you, we want to care for you, right? Who here agrees that we're all here to care for each other? We're not here to like hurt each other, harm one another. That's not our intention. At the heart of it is we want to care. And so remembering that, again, it takes courage, vulnerability to show up. We're here to really honor that. Interdependence and trust. We're here to trust in the sovereignty and inherent wisdom of each person. I think with meritocracy, patriarchy, it's often that we are told what we need to know. We're not good enough as we are, but the truth is we are inherently wise. We know what we need, and when we can attune to our own wisdom, that's when we find our wholeness, right? That's when we can feel that we have a sense of choice and sovereignty. And so when I trust that you have wisdom, I trust that you know what's best for you, that allows for this positive feedback loop where we trust one another. And it takes time, it takes relational healing, it takes capacity, it takes self-responsibility, but that's what we're moving towards, is trust and interdependence. Again, not here to give advice, but if you do want to offer something or reflect something that someone said, please ask for consent. You can ask for consent in the chat. What we can do is offer love and encouragement through the chat or body language. So I think one of the things that I love about Zoom calls nowadays is I can see like a lot of people are snapping their fingers. I love doing beams where I just like offer love through my hands and saying like, I see you. I can wiggle my fingers too to add a little bit of flair. So however you want to offer love and encouragement, you can do so. Okay, is there anything that you need to feel a little bit more safer here? If so, please put that in the chat. I'll wait 1 minute for you to put that in. And if not, we'll move on. Anything that you need to know for you to feel like any part of you that is here or might show up to feel like it's safe to be here, that it can be welcomed. Or any requests, anything that can help you feel a little bit more here and now. Okay, feel free to add that in at any time. I have the chat open. I'll keep an eye on it. So if anything comes up for you, please let us know. Okay, so let's dive in. We have until 3:30 today, so it feels like I'm talking a little bit fast. It's because I want to make sure that I honor your time. If we don't get through everything today, that's okay because it is a series. I will see you again in 2 weeks if you choose to come back. So what is decolonial healing, right? That's the big question that we're here to answer today. To me, decolonial healing is a process, right? It's not something that happens overnight. It's not a book that we read. It's a process that, like Celine said, it's very likely our life's purpose, right? Probably the reason why we, if you believe in incarnation, right? Like we incarnated as this human, this actual human being, skin and flesh and bones, and our identities, because we're here to really come back to love. And right now, love is something that we know how to say, but do we know how to practice love, right? And to me, decolonial healing is a practice of love. And it's a process of unlearning the impact of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, both culturally and systemically. It's also part of grieving, right? What was lost in the devastation of colonization. Grief is something that I often find I feel almost every day when I think about healing and colonization and what was lost. It's also reclaiming our sovereignty and our wholeness, right? Sovereignty is this belief, this practice that I am self-governing. I get to decide for myself what is right for me and what I want to believe, right? And colonization has stripped that away. It has made us believe that there is something other than ourselves, aka whiteness or colonization, colonial culture, as better than. And so when we reclaim our sovereignty and our wholeness, our indigenous wisdom, our indigenous practices, we are decolonizing. It also asks us to heal our personal trauma and rewire our nervous system. And we'll talk about why in a moment here. But essentially, colonial trauma lives in the body. That's what trauma is. It's not emotional trauma, right? Emotions are part of how trauma shows up, but trauma lives at the level of the body and the nervous system. There's wiring in our nervous system that perpetuates patterns, cycles, and behaviors that we learn from our family through family dynamics, family beliefs and practices, and also actual, trauma that has happened to our physical bodies. Yeah. So when we heal our trauma, we are undoing the wiring, we're rewiring towards health. And we'll talk about what that looks like. And then collective healing, right? So personal healing and then collective healing, uplifting those that have been historically oppressed and marginalized. How do we create spaces where we can uplift, and how can we give back, right? For those of us who have proximity to whiteness or have privilege or power, how can we share that power? How can we redistribute our resources so that we're uplifting communities and folks who have been historically oppressed, especially our Black brothers and sisters and gender nonconforming folks. So the approach that we're taking over the next 8 weeks is understanding culture and embodiment. And I say this because it's very easy to point and say that is systemic oppression, that is patriarchy, that is whiteness. It's over there, right? I can see it, it's over there. But really, the real change and healing happens when we look at how our bodies, right, the embodiment of who we are, plays a role in decolonizing, how we take up space as marginalized and oppressed bodies, right? It's easier, again, to say it's out there, and it's a lot harder to look at the ways that we have maybe been complicit, very likely, or have become victims of colonization or oppressed from colonization. And how we do that is through culture, right? If we can understand how to dismantle oppression through creating new culture and remembering ancestral ways, then we're undoing whiteness as a culture. Because culture, right, we're going to go into it in a moment here, culture is the set of norms, behaviors, and beliefs that are upheld by a social group, right? And right now, whiteness is the dominant culture. So when we can understand how we are perpetuating whiteness as a culture, then we can begin to undo it. When we can name it, then we can heal from it. So that's the approach that we're taking. We're going to look at the body and we're going to look at our culture. So we already did this embodiment practice. So I would love to invite us to once more just take a moment to orient and ground with our five senses, because I think maybe I can already feel like some activation coming up by talking about this already. So let's just take a moment to pause and maybe grab a sip of water. I'm going to orient. I'll guide us through. So you're welcome to engage in whatever capacity feels right for you. You can go to the bathroom if you want. You can stop listening. Just do what you need here as a little mini grounding break. So I'm noticing in my body that there's some tightness in my chest, and so I'm just placing my hand there and just allowing my senses to attune to it. I'm saying hello to this part of me that feels a little bit activated. And while I'm attuned to this part of my body, I'm looking around my space as well. I see my pink water bottle. I'm noticing the petals of a dried rose that I have. I don't smell anything, but I hear construction happening outside my house. And what's helping me the most right now is feeling the weight of my body on the chair. Noticing how the chair is supporting me. And as I attune to that, I can sense that my body is allowing the chair to support me. So I'm almost like I'm letting go a little bit. I'm not needing to hold my own weight so much. Even if it's just 5% of if that's all you can manage right now, beautiful, wonderful. Yeah, movement is great as well. Stretching, creating some expansion in the body where we might feel contracted. Or if we feel really expanded, maybe a little contraction coming inward towards the body. This is part of titrating, right? Oftentimes when our nervous system begins to feel a little bit activated, there's this rush, a fight or flight kicks in. Literally, our body is producing stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. So sometimes it feels like we have to go quickly, right? We got to rush into it. Really, can we slow it down a little bit? Say, I'm here. There's nothing that's actually harming me right now. There isn't a threat around me. Nothing is here to hurt me. And we can use the senses to orient to that. Yeah. We'll take 2 more minutes here. Yeah, feeling your feet on the ground. Again, the senses, right? Like the sense of feeling, like, oh, I can feel, like literally feel my whole foot on the floor. Yeah, already I can feel that there's some regulation that's coming to the group space. Yeah. And the reason why there's so many options is because I trust that you can meet yourself. And if you're looking, if you need ideas, you know, there are all these different ideas that I've been sharing. If you need more guidance, please feel free to put it in the chat. If you notice something coming up for you that you are not sure how to meet, please let us know, right? We're here to care for you, and I want to care for you. Sometimes it's easier to say, oh, it's okay, I don't want to burden anyone, right? I would rather isolate myself than share what's hard for me, because I don't want to burden. But that ultimately isn't helpful. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on. But again, please know that if anything, I would really love and encourage you to say pause if you need us to. Put it in the chat, right? We're a collective, we're a group. We're not here to leave anyone behind. If one person says, I need a break, I need a pause, we'll pause. Yeah, we're not here to override our body's instincts, right? Our bodies are really wise, y'all. Like, it tells us, it gives us these signals all the time. So we can pause to attune to, instead of overriding it, like how we've been taught, how we've been conditioned to, maybe we gain a little bit more sovereignty. Okay, so what is culture, right? Culture is a set of norms, beliefs, decisions that are made on a daily basis, consciously or unconsciously, right, by a collective group that ultimately upholds what becomes socially and widely acceptable. And from a fractal point of view, and fractal is something that Adrienne Marie Brown writes in Emergent Strategy, which I love. It's given me so much language for what I've been thinking and feeling, is that what we embody, like what we uphold, consciously or unconsciously, with or without intention, ultimately impacts humanity. And it becomes the culture that we uphold. So the practices that we do for ourselves, right? The self-care practices, the way we meet ourselves, the way we meet one another, ultimately becomes the culture that we create, right? So it's this idea of like macro and micro, right? Big and small. It's all interrelated, right? If you think of a leaf and how it's multiple, or rather it's one pattern that just multiplies to become a whole leaf or tree. So it's the same idea that everything that we practice, even if it's tiny, tiny, tiny thing, ultimately, the more we do it, it becomes culture. It impacts the larger, the whole. And so colonial values, right, upholds whiteness as a culture, where power dynamics are inevitable because it is dominant, right? It wants to dominate something else, whether that's the land or a racial group or a gender, right? Or by genderizing us, it is a way to control us, right? By saying you are this, you are that. Inevitably, there is a power dynamic there because it wants to dominate. And historically, people of color have assimilated to whiteness as a culture because we needed to survive, right? 90% of the whole world has been in contact with European colonization, whiteness. And so historically, globally, we have had to assimilate because we needed to survive. Which means that we have not only adopted, right, not by choice, but we've had to adopt these values, but we also understand them to be a threat to our safety if we did not play by their rules, right? So some of us are more complicit than others, but oftentimes we know that we aren't, then we're going to be harmed, we're going to be hurt. And so I wanted to share a quote by Resmaa Menakem, who is a cultural somatics teacher, and is a really important book. I think I have it right here, but it's about racialized trauma. He writes that the attempt to reenact the event being the trauma, right, whatever it might have been, whether generationally our ancestors experienced the first ancestor who had contact with whiteness, the trauma that happened to them gets passed down in the body, right? Or their attempt to heal that trauma by reenacting it so that they can, it's an unconscious thing, and to the rational mind it might not make sense. Like, why would you reenact trauma? Why would you reenact something that harmed you? It's because it's the nervous system's way of wanting to heal it. It's replaying this thing that happened to us because it wants to regain a sense of control. It wants to complete itself. Because what happens is when trauma happens, and we'll go into this in next week, a little bit more about trauma, but when trauma happens, when we're experiencing threat rather, the adrenaline and cortisol that happens in our body creates that fight or flight. And if we weren't able to complete that fight or flight, if we weren't able to discharge that excess energy, it gets stored in the body as trauma. So that's what trauma is. It's stored energy in our nervous system from trauma that happened, and we weren't able to complete the fight or flight, right? And oftentimes, colonial trauma it happens multiple times over and over. So the fight or flight can never really be completed until we feel safe. And that's what we're here to do, right? That's why it's inherited trauma as well. It's passed down from body to body. So when this happens repeatedly over time, right, the trauma response of fight or flight or freeze can often look like a person's personality, right? Quote unquote, the angry Black person, or that person just is not accountable, right? They're just constantly in shame. They can't hold themselves accountable because of a trauma response. And as years and decades pass, reflexive trauma responses can lose context. Person may forget that something happened to him or her and then internalize the trauma responses. When this same strategy gets internalized and passed down over generations within a particular group, it can start to look like culture. Okay, thank you, Celine. Appreciate you. Enjoy class. Take care.
I actually think that because the recording is to my Zoom account, if I leave, this is going to end.
Okay.
I don't have an option to leave the meeting. I only have an option to end the meeting, even though you're a co-host. I'm going to make you... Wait. Is this over? Okay. I'll see if this works. Sorry. I'm going to leave, and I think it shouldn't end the meeting or record.
Yeah,
But
it will probably make me co-host. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you so
That's
much
okay.
for the space.
All right. Thanks. Okay, it looks like it's still recording, so that's good. All right. How's everyone doing? Maybe put in the chat how you're feeling. So I'll just continue while you put that in the chat. More energized, okay, yeah. Yeah. So picking up where we left off here, when the same strategy gets internalized and passed down over generations within a particular group, it can start to look like culture. So this is what I mean by whiteness is culture, right? So, okay, let's see what's in the chat here. Calm and reflecting, helpful and supportive. Great, thank you. I'm glad that this is landing well for you all. Yeah, she feels understood. Thank you. I'm not saying your names to protect your anonymity on the recording. Yeah. So what is the current dominant culture, right? What do we understand as whiteness as a culture? These are some of the things that I understand to be whiteness as a culture, and there's a lot of resources on this. And you're welcome when I read this list, if you feel like I'm missing anything, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And as I read this, I invite you to just kind of like listen with a sense of attunement to what might be happening at the level of the body. We're doing this so that we can, again, not override anything that's showing up for us as we listen to this list, and to really attune to and honor your body's capacity. Because again, the last thing I want to do is to put you in a state where you can't go to class, or you're not able to meet your needs after this because you're wiped out. And I this is important to me because I speak from experience. So the dominant culture, right, whiteness upholds these values, right, a sense of urgency. We talked about this feeling of needing to rush and get things done quickly, right? Like, when can you do this? Deadlines, these not really creating the space for more depth and more intention in the way that we do things. Control, right? Needing to feel a sense of control over something else, or control of our own body, our own experiences. Yeah. And that there's like one right way to behave or to do things, right? That you have to go to college, and you not to say that y'all in college are not, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just this one right way in order for us to be accepted by society. And these ways show up, yeah, everything feels so binary, exactly. Yeah, that black and white thinking, right? It's either or. Perfectionism, that's another one that I think we might be able to relate to. Hierarchy, right? That there's one person with more power and others don't, right? And these values, they show up in different ways, right? The fractal idea, where it can be very little and it can be really big, it can be really obvious, and can be really subtle as well. A fixed agenda, right? There's no room for adaptation or fluidity, or for like meeting the very real lived human experiences. Like, oh, like I created this agenda for myself, but today I'm having my moon, I'm bleeding, and I'm really tired, but I have to do it because I'm obligated to. It's what I've been conditioned to do, right? There's no fluidity, and there's no, again, uplifting of the human experience, the lived human experience. We talk about black and white, that's the binary thinking. It's punitive, and it often tends to shame, right? Punitive meaning it's about punishment, that you've done something wrong, so you have to be punished. So incarceration, the prison industrial complex, like the way cancel culture, it's often punitive, right? It's about, you've done something wrong, so you're now ostracized, you're now being punished, you're canceled from society, or like, shame on you for doing that. I believe it's Angela Davis who wrote, the master's house cannot be dismantled with the master's tools, right? And shaming is one of the master's tools. And I have noticed that more recently, shaming is something that I have done, to my partner, who we're currently undoing patriarchy in our relationship, where I tend to shame him, right? Because he shames me. And so it's perpetuating this cycle, and it's not helping anyone. Scarcity, which is honestly, I think, kind of like, it really should be the first one, because it's the underlying belief that there isn't enough. And if there isn't enough, then I must take from somebody else. That there isn't enough for me, so I have to have power over somebody else in order for me to feel like I'll have what I need, right? Meritocracy, so, that one kind of like makes sense, right? Like, what are your achievements? What are your, what validates you? What's your credibility in order for you to do the thing that you want to do? And honestly, like, I still, I'm saying all these things, and I'm like, well, yeah, I still, I can point out ways that these things are showing up for me. And the idea is not to shame yourself. If you are finding that some of these are, something that you struggle with, that's because you've been conditioned to. That's because you've been colonized. And it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal. A disregard of the spiritual, the mystical, and the earth-based, right? Everything is logical, rational, has to be linear, has to make sense, right? It has to like make logical, linear sense. When really, our brains, the reptilian brain, the animal body, the earth body, that governs pretty much 98% of our day-to-day decisions. It is not our cognitive brain. Our cognitive brain wants to think that it has control, when really it's our animal body that really dictates how we show up. Yeah. Anything that I missed? How is this landing for folks? Yeah. Definitely. Take a women's study course that basically dismantled the whole idea between science and what's real or fake, and really opened my eyes to how we are like subjects being told by mostly white scientists whether our culture is worthy. Yes, 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 yes. Finger snaps. I'm so grateful that women's studies exist. Yeah. So all of these values, right? These cultural practices, these things that are normalized in our society, perpetuates power over, right? If I do it the right way, that means I'm right, which means I have power over somebody else. Literally, if I can have control over something else. It's all about power dynamics, right? How much power do I have over a certain person or situation? And so the nature of power dynamics is that you can't see it, but it is felt on the level of the body. Our nervous system can feel when there is something that has power over us. And so our nervous system will send a signal to our brain, our reptilian brain, right? The animal body, and say, ding, 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 something is threatening us. There's something that has power over us. And so we must fight or flight. And what happens is, and I do this because this is representative of the brain. This is the reptilian brain, and this is our cognitive thinking, right? And when we are under threat, this part goes offline, and we're purely operating from our amygdala, which is governing our nervous system, so fight or flight, right? And so when we feel that and we go into fight or flight, we might respond with needing to leave, or anger, right? An outburst of anger. Or if we get overwhelmed because we're not able to fight or flight, then we freeze. And oftentimes, shame is something shame is a freeze response. I'm overwhelmed by this. I don't know how to work with this, so I'm going to collapse into freeze. I'm just going to contract. And that's a hypo response. And I'm not going too into depth with trauma responses because I want to do that in another class, the second class, or third maybe. But this is why power over causes us to respond with trauma, right? So that's why we have to learn how to heal our trauma alongside with creating the new culture that upholds choices, values, and beliefs of sovereignty and interdependence, and power with and power together, right? Why does it perpetuate trauma? Colonialism. It strips away our sovereignty because something else knows better. Right? We've had to assimilate to survive. Those shaming and punitive measures for not assimilating, and then that power over, that loss of my choice and agency. So how do we heal? Where do we go from here? Right? Having awareness of our trauma. How, when, where does it show up? What are the energetic and embodied patterns? When I say patterns, like trauma it's a cycle, it's a pattern, right? It's something that we do, again, in the micro or the macro. For example, one of my patterns is I often tend to put the needs of others before mine, right? It's a pattern of codependency that stems in trauma because somebody else's emergency, somebody else's trauma, like I kind of get caught up in that, and that's a pattern. So I'm learning how to undo and rewire that pattern. What are the trauma responses? And that's what we'll be diving into in the next few sessions. We heal our sense of worthiness and our right to take up space, right? Where am I playing small? Where do I feel like I need to hide? Where do I feel like I need to be, where do I feel like I'm not being my full self? And why? Where did I learn this? What is the conditioning that is making me feel that I can't take up space? And oftentimes it's these values, right? It's this. I can't meet the momentum of this dominant culture. So all I can do is freeze. All I can do is hide or make myself small. So when we begin to heal, and I say this with a lot of love, right? This is something that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. Again, it's at the level of the body. So right now we're understanding it at the conscious, the intellectual level. But how do we begin to actually embody it? How do we actually practice this in our day-to-day lives? We can also reconnect to our ancestral ways of being that regard the sacred, the mystical, the ritual. There's a lot of healing in our lineages and in our cultures that regard our sovereignty, our wholeness, our connection to the divine. And a lot of that has been deemed unworthy, invalid, wrong, dirty by colonialism. And so when we reclaim our ancestral practices, we are decolonizing. We're saying that I get to reclaim this because this is something that my culture of origin regarded as sacred and mystical, right? And colonization is, whiteness is all about logical, right? And last but not least, body-based healing, right? The trauma lives in the body. It gets passed down generation and generation through the body. So the more we can learn how to work with the body, which is the whole intention of this 8 weeks, learning how to heal through the body, right? Embodied healing. That's when we heal. So what are the values that we can practice instead, right? How can we now attune to what's possible? We know now what's wrong. We can say, oh, these are the ways that colonialism has affected us. So what can we practice instead? This is a whole list. Each one of them can be a lesson in itself. There's so much here. So I'm just going to read them, and you're welcome to maybe like pick one or two that you're interested in, that is really calling out to you. When you hear me say this, you're like, oh yeah, that one. And just begin to practice that over the next 2 weeks until we see each other again. Sovereignty, I get to choose for myself, right? I get to decide what comes in, what stays out. I get to decide what I want to lean into, where I want to hang back. Integrity and self-responsibility. How honest can I be with myself about where I'm at in my journey, right? For me, I had to get real honest with my privilege as an Asian woman and not as a Black person. Like it was so easy to get caught up in like, I'm marginalized, I'm this, I'm that, but like really being in integrity with like, okay, yes, I am marginalized, yes, I am oppressed, and I have privilege. How do I use this privilege? How am I responsible for the privilege and the power that I do have, and how do I share this power with others? Interdependence is about, not about like meeting another person's needs, rather it's, I have needs and you have needs. How do we meet them together? It's not my needs are more important than yours, or my needs matter more than yours, or your needs matter more than mine. It's our needs both matter. How can we create a space where our needs can be met? And what is the compromise, right, that has to happen if not all the needs can be met? Interdependence. Co-creation, right? How can we create an experience together rather than one person, which leads to the next one, decentralized leadership. It's not one person that has all the wisdom and all the knowledge, collective wisdom, like really like attuning to like, when if your friend comes to you, for example, and says like, I have this thing, instead of like throwing a bunch of advice to her, like ask her, be curious about her process. Like, why do you think that is? Like, what do you think would help you the most right now? Attuning to her wisdom, their wisdom rather, not to use gender binaries. That's similar to trusting in an attunement to health. I think that a lot of times it's so easy to focus on what's wrong. So how can we attune to health without bypassing it, right? This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not covering up what's difficult with toxic positivity. This is acknowledging that shit's hard right now, that things aren't easy, and where if maybe even like 2% feels easy, what is 5% of my life I can be grateful for? Where is 5% of my life I can attune to joy and health? Because that's what's going to help us create capacity to meet the difficulty, not override or bypass it. Being slow and intentional, right? practicing small, doable steps little by little over time instead of one big thing at a time. How can I, instead of like thinking of the 500 assignments that I have, what is the one assignment that I know I can do right now? Lived experiences over intellectual ability or knowledge, cultivating your intuition or your spirituality, your spiritual practices, if any. Relational healing, how can I meet myself and my relationships, my community, in more of our wholeness, in more of our authenticity. Practicing ritual, being non-linear or cyclical, right? Cyclical, really honoring your cycles, like your moon cycle. If you're tired, let yourself be tired. Let yourself rest. Rest is something that the Nat Ministry on Instagram talks about so much, like rest for resistance, because capitalism has made us overproduce and overwork our bodies. We're not machines. We need rest. Non-shaming. So this is something that for me has been really powerful in my own practice, is like really unshaming myself for whenever I feel like I'm not doing things right. Like, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. Why do I feel this way? Like unshaming that. Like, it's okay that I feel this way. It's normal that I feel this way, right? It makes sense that I feel this way because so and so. Authentic and vulnerable leadership, honoring individual and group capacity, whole self-expression. So how do you express yourself? Is it through journaling? Is it through a podcast? Is it through voice notes? Art, dance, movement, right? Expressing yourself, taking up space with your expression. Looking to the environment and the nature as oracles. So oracles meaning like looking for guidance, look to nature, go to the beach and listen to the ocean, see what your intuition tells you, what the ocean has to tell you. Respect for the land and each other, creating ecosystems of care, again, not to give advice or to tell one another what is the right way to do things, but rather how can I care for you? How can you feel most cared for right now? Practicing an abundance mindset and gradient possibilities, which is instead of black and white, either or, like it's either this or that, like what are the possibilities that exist within the two in the spectrum, right? If one side is black and the other side is white, what is the gradient, right? Maybe it's 2% of this, maybe it's a little bit of that, a little bit of this, right? So how can we create more possibilities in our life? And ultimately, this helps us create power with and power together, not power over, which is what dominant white culture is about. Okay, so I'd like to take 3 minutes to do a practice that can help to begin embodying some of these values. And okay, looks like somebody hopped off. That's all good. Okay. So this embodiment practice is something that's really tender. It's from the lineage of Reed Bloom, which is my trauma resolution practitioner, and essentially it's this idea that in our bellies, like our literal stomach, that area of our body where it's soft, right? Maybe that's where our sense of worthiness and receptivity lives. And so these affirmations help us to amplify our sense of worthiness. It helps us feel that we matter, right? And when we drop into the level of the body, that's where we can begin to integrate these affirmations at the level of the body. Because one thing to say it, right? It's another thing to feel it. So the invitation, sorry, my dog's drinking water. Invitation is for you to, if you want to join me, place a hand or two on your belly. And maybe just take a few deep breaths here, and knowing that I just talked a whole bunch of things. Maybe just letting that, drop that for now. Know that what you needed to hear and what you needed to learn will integrate. You've heard it. It's there. You're not losing anything. There's nothing that you need to hold on to. Yeah. Just maybe see if you can notice anything at the level of the stomach, at the belly, at the belly button. And it's okay if you don't feel anything. It's okay that if there's nothing there for now. And you're invited to repeat those affirmations after me in your mind or out loud. I am here. I am here. I am here. I am now. I am now. I am now. I matter. I matter. I matter. Just take a moment to notice what's there to notice without needing to change or fix anything or make meaning of anything. Just allowing these affirmations to be planted at the level of the body and the belly, like seeds that you'll nurture in your own time and way. I am here. I am now. I matter. And an invitation is for you to consider over the next 2 weeks, what do I need? What do you need in any moment? Maybe during a break or something, asking yourself, what do I need to meet myself physically, energetically, emotionally, spiritually? Instead of what do I need to do, what do I need for myself? What do I need so that I feel like I'm being taken care of? You're welcome to gently open your eyes if they're not already there. You can write things down, you can journal, but the invitation is for you to share in these last 3 minutes that we have or so together, what's alive for you. So we'll close with the shares, and yeah, I'd love to open the floor for you to share, and I'll just set a timer for a minute so that we can just keep track of time. Okay. Anyone want to share what's alive for you, what you're noticing? Yeah, you can put in the chat as well. Oh, let me pause.